Hey guys, how are we? Everybody good? Yes? Good. Hey, quick announcement before we get into the message for tonight. Well, two things. First of all, I want to thank Carter for leading us in worship tonight. Thank you, Carter. Appreciate you, buddy. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to announce is we have one of our friends from Relevant who is going to be baptized this Sunday morning here at Grace. It's going to be during the 10:45 service, and her name is Abby, and I will not make her come up here, but she is here tonight. So can you all join with me in celebrating Abby and this decision that she's made? Yeah, thank you, Abby. And I wanted to personally invite you, Relevant students, to come and show up to support her. But even more than that, what we're really celebrating and what we're doing is we're showing up to support the fact that Jesus has changed her life. That's what baptism is all about. That's what we're going to celebrate. So I hope you can join us 10:45 right there across the hall in the auditorium this Sunday. We're going to celebrate Abby as she takes that step. And some of you may have seen the Instagram post for our friend Bennett, who made the decision to get baptized this past weekend at Fall Retreat. So yeah, that's right. So I'm very proud of both of you guys, and again, just grateful for the fact that God's love that we just sang about is strong enough to change people's lives, and He does it here at Relevant, He does it here at Grace Community Church, He does it all over the world. It's an honor to be able to sing and worship Him because He is worthy of all the praise we could ever give Him, like we sang about tonight. So with that, we're going to jump into our message tonight, Catalyst Part 4. So this is our series called Catalyst. This is the end of this series, and we have been doing some science things throughout the weeks. And if you remember, the word catalyst means something that creates a change or speeds up a change that's already taking place. So a catalyst is something that changes things or speeds up change that's already taken place. And we've been tying that to this idea of faith that we find in the book of Hebrews and looking at different passages in Hebrews. And the first week we spent talking about faith and how that can be a catalyst in our lives to change things. The second week we talked about, how people can be a catalyst for us, how they can, when we come into contact with our small group leaders or pastors or parents or grandparents or people that have faith in Jesus, that can be a catalyst on our journey of faith. It can change things for us as we learn from them and interact with them. And then last week, we talked about the most important one, about how Jesus is a catalyst for a relationship with God. If we want to have a relationship with God, that is only available to us through Jesus. If we want to have our lives changed in a positive way, then we need to look no further than Jesus. And tonight, we're talking about the logical conclusion of that. So if Jesus has changed us from the inside out, if we have been experiencing changes in our lives based on other people investing in us and other people have been a catalyst for us, if we have put our faith and trust in God, then that all leads to what we're talking about tonight. So I want to read some verses for you, and then we're going to talk about these lanterns and why I brought them here tonight. And then we're going to talk about the thing that changes in us. Does that all sound good? If it does or doesn't, it's what's going to happen. So I hope you get on board. Hebrews 10, 19 through 23, here's what it says. This is going to sound very similar to the language we saw in Hebrews 4 last week, for those of us that were able to be here. So Hebrews 10, 19 through 23. And so, dear brothers and sisters, we can boldly enter heaven's most holy place because of the blood of Jesus. By his death, Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through the curtain into the most holy place. And since we have a great high priest who rules over God's house, let us go right into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him. For our guilty consciences have been sprinkled with Christ's blood to make us clean, and our bodies have been washed with pure water. Let us hold tightly, without wavering, to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. These words are almost identical to Hebrews chapter 4 that we read last week, where we have a great high priest who is able to sympathize with our weakness, and yet he is perfect and holy. He has passed through the heavens, those verses say, and because of that, we can enter with boldness the presence of God. Remember the curtain that we talked about last week and the holy place and the high priest, that's all language that people reading this letter reading Hebrews in the original day would have quickly understood, and for us, we need to understand that God's chosen people, the Israelites, had a temple, and that was the place they would go to worship, and when they would enter the temple, there would be the holy place, and then there would be a sectioned off area to the most holy place. There's this big, thick curtain, multiple feet of curtain, not like a flimsy shower curtain like we talked about last week, but a big curtain, and that curtain separated the presence of God from the rest of the temple. And only a high priest could go into the presence of God, and they could only do it once a year. They had to do all these rituals and sacrifices in order to be able to present themselves as clean to a holy and perfect God. And they would offer sacrifices on behalf of the entire people of the nation of Israel, and they would only do that once a year. And when Jesus died on the cross, we read last week, that when he breathed his last breath, the curtain tore from top to bottom, which was a big deal because it was signifying the fact that now we are no longer separated from God. We can enter into the most holy place. We can pray and have relationship with God anytime we want to because of Jesus and his blood and his sacrifice. And so these verses echo that promise that's given in Hebrews 4. And what I love about these verses is they go right into the natural next step. If we have entered into the most holy place, if we have a relationship with God, if we allow him to begin to come in and change our hearts from the inside out, if we are building our life on that love that we sang about just a few minutes ago, then the natural progression is it's going to impact not just us, but the people around us. And that brings us to these lanterns. So, like I said, not really a science experiment. It's pretty straightforward. But right here, it is a visual. Right here, this is for my visual learners. In this hand, I have a lantern that has no batteries in it. So I could push this button that has the power button all day long, and is this ever going to turn on if I push this button just like it is? No, of course not, because you learn at a very young age on Christmas morning that batteries are important for all of the toys that you received. And so if there's no batteries, it's not going to work. But if we put batteries in, here's this. This is why when you guys asked me about science, I was like, oh no, this is going to ruin my whole illustration, because now you're going to be like, wow, cool science, Drew, batteries. If you put in, I know, there it is. I know. Behold, science. If you put batteries in, the light turns on. Now, why am I doing this? Because this is very obvious. Well, here's why. It's not because I'm good at science. I know that's a shocker to you. But thank you. It's because this that we just read, this idea of entering into the presence of God, of putting our faith in him, of him changing us, that is like batteries coming into a lantern. Where before, if we were walking around on this earth apart from the love of God, having no relationship with God, we were created for more than that. We were created for his light to shine through us, but we're never going to be able to do it apart from a power source entering our lives, a catalyst changing something in our lives. And so Jesus does that. He changes things for us. And what I love about this illustration of a lantern is you'll notice when batteries come into a lantern, the lantern is changed, right? It feels a little heavier. It has light coming out of it. But the beautiful thing about this is it doesn't just impact this lantern. If we were to turn off every light in this place, this lantern is bright enough that it would still change and push back the darkness, at least in this little area. The lantern changes the setting around it because the batteries have been put into it. Do you get it? In the same way, when we have God change us from the inside out, it's not just for our benefit, and it is for our benefit. To have a relationship with him changes everything for us in the best way possible. But also, it changes those around us because God begins to work through us. The scriptures tell us that God is light, and in him there is no darkness, and the light shall overcome the darkness. When God enters us and changes us, his light begins to shine through us and impact those around us too. Let's read the very next verses in Hebrews chapter 10. We read 19 through 23 earlier about Jesus and our high priest and the holy place and approaching God with boldness. Look at the very next verses. The natural progression of a life changed by God is that we then are used by God to change those we come in contact with as well. Verse 24. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. Let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. So, there's an inward change that results in an outward focus. The very next step of being changed by Jesus is to turn our attention away from ourselves, to turn away from our selfishness and focus on those around us, to be an encouragement to them, to motivate them to love and good works. Let's keep reading. A couple chapters later, there's a couple more verses that speak to this same idea. Hebrews 13, 1 through 3. Here's what it says. Keep on loving each other as brothers and sisters. Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without realizing it. Remember those in prison as if you were there yourself. Remember also those being mistreated as if you felt their pain in your own bodies. So, God's light that enters us then shines to those around us. What are the ways that this talks about? I want to walk back through some of the words that they shared in these verses. The first one is motivate one another. If you've ever had a really good coach or a really good teacher or a really good small group leader, you know what it means to be motivated. It's when somebody else gives you words, maybe even noises at times. I'm thinking of coaches specifically, that get you motivated to go and perform or to go do something. It makes you want to be better. Like when a coach gives a really great pregame speech, or when a teacher calls you to stay after class, not to like get you in trouble or anything, but to tell you that they see something in you that you may not see in yourself yet, and to call you to something greater. It motivates you. Or a small group leader who takes time out of their life to sit across the table from you and encourage you and help you. Those are motivating things. It makes you want to do better. And the things that we're called to motivate one another to is not to be better at sports, and it's not to be better at school, and it's not even to be better at life. It's to acts of love. So what do we motivate each other to? We motivate each other to be more loving. I want you to think back to the conversations you've had this week with your friends. How rare is it at times, hopefully not very, but how rare is it at times for us to have conversations that motivate love rather than motivating gossip or motivating bitterness or motivating negativity? You see, we're all motivating. It's just sometimes we don't motivate towards the right things, right? Like all of you in this room are leaders. People follow you. The decisions that you make influence those around you. The question is, are you going to motivate people for good and for love, or are we going to motivate people for making bad decisions and peer pressure and egging them on to things that they shouldn't be doing? You see, when Jesus changes us from the inside out and the light begins to shine through us, we need to ask ourselves, are we motivating those around us towards love or towards our own selfish desires? And if you have that out of balance or out of whack, it's not too late to change it, because there is a God in heaven, a great high priest who has gone before you, who has made a way for you to enter into the presence of God, and he loves you. He doesn't love you any less when you mess up, but he does love you enough not to leave you right where you are. He loves you right where you are, and he loves you enough to change you. And part of that changing is beginning to motivate one another to acts of love. Use those powers you have of influence for good and not for evil. All right, use them to motivate each other towards love. Next thing it talks about is meeting together. It says, don't give up on meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. What you're doing right here is meeting together. You did it this week. I'm proud of you. You're here at Relevant. That means you got to spend time singing to Jesus. You got to pray. Pray too. That wasn't what I was trying to say, but hopefully you did that. You also got to play games. You got to play Nine Square. You got to play Dino Fingers. You got to do all these fun things. Tonight, you got to hear, right now you're getting to hear the Word of God. All of these things, in a few minutes you're going to do maybe the most important of all of that with meeting together. You're going to go and sit in small group and talk about what you've heard. These are ways that you can grow closer to God as you build relationships with other people who are trying to worship God too. You see, it's so important to be in a community of faith. If you have been changed by Jesus, he invites you, he calls you, he commands you to be in a community where you can grow closer to him, because it's not just for you. Remember, the light impacts those around you. I remember a conversation with my youth pastor when I was in high school. I was a senior. He knew that one day I wanted to be a youth pastor by this point. I knew that. And we had conversations about that. And there were several weeks in a row that I had skipped student ministry for various reasons. And none of them were like bad or wrong. I just had other stuff going on. And I remember my youth pastor pulled me aside one night when I had come back, and he was like, hey, I want to point something out to you. you know that this isn't just for you to grow, right? I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, when you're here, it's not just for you, it's for the people around you. He goes, we're stronger as a group with you here. That's not because I'm special or anything. It's because as a group collectively, that could be true, that is true of every single one of you. We are stronger as a group with you in it. There are things that you can say in small group that other people aren't going to be able to say. There are experiences that you've had that other people have not had. There are ways that you can understand God that other people may not fully understand him yet. And you being bold enough to sit in group, to listen to other people, to share your experiences, to be vulnerable, all of that those are things that God can use to impact people around you. I mean, we think about it as our small group leaders teaching us, and of course that's true. Or me standing up here, or Sarah standing up here teaching you, and of course that's true. But do you guys know we learn from you as well? You have a place in this, you have a part in this. This is what a community of faith looks like. We don't give up meeting together because we know that we're better for it, and the group is better for it when we're together, and we're all worshiping God. You need others. Others need you. And so what do? We encourage one another. We don't just motivate them to acts of love, but we also encourage them. We build them up when they're struggling. We listen to them when they're hurting. We don't try and be funny and cut them down when they share something, but we listen and we empathize. And we ask them to help us understand, and we're there for them. This is what it looks like to meet together. The last thing it talks about is loving each other. Love each other. And there are two main ways that the verse in Hebrews 13 talks about this, the verses. The first one is hospitality. And this meant something specific in that culture where you would invite people into your home. Like if they came by, they needed a place to stay. It was a cultural thing that they were supposed to invite people, strangers even, into their home to stay. That's probably not our application for this now. Like you probably shouldn't go home and invite strangers into your home. Certainly don't do that without asking your parents first. But what we can do is we can be hospitable. And at the heart of hospitality, it's this. When you're comfortable, when you're in your environment, inviting someone else into that space and making them feel welcome. So here's what this could look like. If you've been at Relevant for a little while and you see someone who's brand new and you know that they don't know anybody else here, or they look uncomfortable, or they're maybe pulling their phone out, which is a sure sign that they're uncomfortable with making discussion. Like, you know the look, right? You've given the look. When you walk into a place that you're uncomfortable and you kind of have your hands in your pockets and you pull out the phone, then you're like, I've already checked my notifications. I don't know why I pulled that out. And you put it away and you walk around and you pull your phone back out. When you see that happening, do you guys know that being hospitable means going over and making them feel welcome? That's not just up to me or Sarah or our small group leaders or even the people who serve us snacks. You guys can be a part of that, being hospitable. In your group, if someone is quiet and you notice that after group, maybe check on them if they're not normally quiet. This is a way you can be hospitable, making people feel welcome and comfortable. That takes intentionality. It takes paying attention to others. It takes love to do that. So what's the other way that it talks about loving each other? Empathy. It talks about being empathetic. It gives some specific examples of this, like recognizing that those who are in prison and feel it as if you were imprisoned yourself. Now, back in that day, in this time, this would refer to people who had been put in prison because of their faith in Jesus. And it's saying, hey, you could be that person too. And so when you know of someone who's struggling, who's bearing a burden, empathize with them, even if you're not in that situation. So again, this probably doesn't look exactly the same today, but the heart of it is this. We can be empathetic towards others, and in doing so, showing love. Even if we don't have the same set of circumstances as someone else, we can empathize with their difficulties being challenging and hard. It's showing kindness rather than being judgmental towards people that are walking through things that are hard. It's trying to listen to understand, not listen to have something else to say. Being empathetic makes a big difference. It's a big step towards showing love to somebody else. So what do? We put ourselves in positions to be empathetic towards others when we listen and when we pay attention to what's going on in their lives rather than being so consumed with what's going on in ours. This is what it looks like to let God's light shine through us. We change from being self-centered to being others-focused. We allow him to change us from the inside out. And we can be a catalyst for change. That's the heart of tonight's message. and all these things, and motivating one another to acts of love, and meeting together and loving each other, it means that we can be a catalyst for change in other people's lives. God can begin to use us to impact other people and push them closer to Jesus, to be Jesus to other people, to be like him in our interactions. Now, this is a big deal, and it's a weighty thing, right? It's really hard to do this well. So what do we do? If we want to practically live this out, how can we possibly be like Jesus to the people around us? I want you to do something with me right now. I want you to think about what one thing could someone do for you today that would be the most encouraging thing you can imagine experiencing? So think about it. Come up with something. What one thing could somebody do for you today that would be the most encouraging thing you can imagine? Does everybody have something in their head? Okay? Now go and do that for somebody else. Because if you're thinking that this is the most encouraging thing that someone could do for me, this is the best thing I can imagine somebody doing for me, the most loving thing, the most caring thing somebody can do for me, chances are, if you're willing to be bold enough to go and do that for somebody else, they're going to feel the same way about it. It's going to be encouraging to them and helpful. It goes back to something we were taught when we were very little, right? Treat others the way you want to be treated. If we want to learn how to be empathetic and kind and loving, we need to think about the way that we receive that love and empathy from others and how it makes us feel, and then go and do that for other people. This is what it looks like to allow God to change us from the inside out, and based on the foundation of his love, to love those around us. I challenge you, whatever that thing is, or think of something else altogether, do something this week to take steps towards that. You're going to be amazed at how God uses your faithfulness in that area. Okay, I want to say one more thing as I close. This is important. The order of this matters. Here's what I mean. We need to remember Jesus and what he's done for us first, and the love that he's shown us first, before we try and take on this idea of loving other people. Because if we get that order backwards, if we focus on loving other people so that Jesus will love us more, we're going to mess it all up. Because guys, listen, there is nothing you can do that will make God love you more, and there's nothing you can do that will make God love you less. You are already loved just as you are, and he loves you enough to begin changing you from the inside out. So we do these things not to earn God's love, but out of God's love that we've already received. Let's be very clear on that, okay? No amount of loving other people is going to make God accept you more. It's not something we do to get a pat on the back. It's not something we do even to feel better about ourselves. We do it because God has changed us from the inside out, and the natural progression of that is to go and be a catalyst for other people. It's out of obedience to God, the love that we've already received, that we go and we pour it out. Does that make sense? So know this, you're loved, you're forgiven, there's grace when you mess this up, but let God in his love change you to then go and love other people around you. Let me pray for you, and then you're going to go to small groups, talk more about it with your leaders. Heavenly Father, thank you so much. Thank you for the love that you've shown us. Thank you that it's not contingent on anything that we do or say or think or know. It is purely because of who you are. You want us, you want a relationship with us because you are good, and you are loving, and you are kind, and you are gracious. So God, allow us to receive that love and then pour it out to the people around us. Help us take steps. If we have put our faith in you, convict us of the times that we fall short of loving those around us. Do it with grace and with gentleness, but with firmness as well. God, we need your correction. We need your reminder that our life is not about us. Our life was given to us by you for your glory. Use us to love those around us and to be a catalyst for faith and for change in the world that you've put us in. God, we love you. We look to you for help. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said? Amen. Amen. I love you guys. Hope you have a great night. Go to small groups.